Chapter 15 of Boy, the Wandering Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Boy, the Wandering Dog by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 15. Mrs. Waverlee had no relapse, and she went to recuperate in the lovely hospital where my mistress had been. Master was questioned very much about her case by his men friends, who said it was one of the most extraordinary they had ever heard of. Oh, the petting I got! I had really done nothing but follow out my dog instinct, but these human beings seemed to think that there never had been, and never would be, such another dog. Mrs. Waverlee was a rich woman, and many persons said, "She will be sure to give the dog a jewelled collar when she gets well." Master and I were very uneasy about this, and he said one day, "If she does, I shall not allow Boy to wear it. Sometimes jewelled collars have cost dogs their lives." Fortunately, Mrs. Waverlee was something beyond the ordinary run of women. When she came back from the hospital, pale but strong and beautiful, she took my head between her two hands. I never saw such a look in the eyes of a mortal person before. You know we dogs sometimes see ghosts. She was like a woman that had died and come to life again. If there had been any nonsense about her, it was all purged away. "Boy," she said in her lovely English voice, "to commemorate your sagacity, I am going to give a year's income to aid the various societies in New York that exist for the purpose of helping lost and starving animals." Oh, how this pleased me! The sufferings of animals affect me so strongly that merely to think of them makes me miserable. I try in vain sometimes to forget the horrible sights I have seen, the dreadful sounds I have heard. I wagged my tail, I licked her hands, I prostrated myself before this beautiful Englishwoman with the other world look in her eyes. She could do nothing for me, but make other dogs happy, whose sufferings made me so unhappy. I adored her, I worshipped her. There was something in her spirit that understood my dog spirit better, far better, than any other person in the world could comprehend me. What was it? I do not know. I merely understood that I reverenced her more than I reverenced my dear master, though of course I loved him more. The Bonstones and my master and mistress were intensely interested in this lovely woman, for she affected them somewhat as she affected me. For a long time after she came from the hospital, she and Egbert visited the Bonstones, and Gringo told me that every one in the household looked upon her with a kind of awe. "She don't care for things other women do," said old Gringo with a mystified air, "and I hear her whispering to herself, 'What shall I do with my life?'" "Then she isn't going back to England?" I said. "No," replied Gringo. "She grows quite cold and white when anyone asks her that. I think it's because they're still fighting over there, and she hates war." One day he came over to our house on his most excited double shuffle. "My boss has fixed the English lily," he said. "Out near his farm in the country is a village where the brown baby will have to go to school by and by. He's offered to build a schoolhouse if Mrs. Waverlee will teach in it." "And will she?" I asked eagerly. "She's tickled to death. Says to train children will be just the ticket for her." Soon after this, Mrs. Waverlee came back to her apartment in our house. I heard a very indiscreet lady one day ask her if she didn't dread going back to the rooms where she had heard the news of her husband's death. Mrs. Waverlee gave the lady a strange smile and said, "He isn't dead to me. I feel him near me all the time." Both Egbert and his mother visited us quite frequently. They both loved the baby, and sometimes the Bonstones came over with little Cyria, and we had quite a party. Little Cyria was a darling, and she was not at all afraid of dogs. Every fine day her nurse took her out on the drive, and she stretched out her little hand to every dog she met. On windy days and rainy days the nurses all took their perambulators up to Broadway, where it was more sheltered. If you notice the New York babies in the vicinity of the drive, you will find that they all look very prosperous, for they are kept out of doors so much. Mrs. Bonstone fussed over Cyria, and Mistress fussed over George Washington, and the baby interest drawing the two ladies together so much, threw the two men together. Both Mr. Bonstone and my dear master were quiet men, disliking society, loving business, and enjoying nothing as much as a long walk together after their day's work was over. Mrs. Granton was not strong enough now to go into society, but Mrs. Bonstone was, and one day I heard her husband talking to her very seriously, and telling her that as long as she lived in the city she ought to keep up a certain amount of social life. She adored him still, and never hesitated to tell him so, and in the long run she usually did as he requested. "But I won't go out in the evening," she said, wagging her saucy head at him. "All right," he replied, "but mind you've promised not to drop all the women you know. You'll get warped and selfish if you do." "What a wise man you are," she said teasingly. "Do hurry and get your old farm ready, so I can be a farmer's wife." I was in the Bonstone house nearly every day, and if I was not, Gringo told me all that went on. He never ran out on the drive without his master. He was afraid of the policeman. On the Bowery, where everybody knew him, he had often gone out alone. I was anxious to know what he thought of the baby Cyria and the farm, and one day I asked him to tell me his real feelings. "Cross your heart feelings," I said. "I know you don't wear your heart on your sleeve." "Both things I hate," he said grumpily, "but I'm going to make myself like 'em." "Oh, Gringo," I said, "how can you hate Cyria?" "She sticks her fingers in my eyes when no one's looking," he said. "Doesn't that prove what I say, that children are enormously clever?" I exclaimed. "But why don't you get up and move away?" "She's master's baby. She's got to be amused." "But your master wouldn't like her to do that." "She'll get over it when she's older," he said patiently. "A dog has got to have some worries, or life would be too sweet." "And you don't like the idea of the farm?" "A Bowery dog on a farm?" said Gringo. "Me for the pavements." "Were you ever on a farm?" I asked. "No, and never want to be. I've heard tell what they're like. Nothing doing from morning till night." "Well, I don't like the country half as well as the city," I said, "but I don't believe I've ever been in a really interesting country place. I'll tell you a great bit of news." "You don't mean to say you're going too?" interrupted Gringo. "Yes, I do," I said. "Master is going to move to the country." "Well, I vow," said the old dog. Then he added, "I thought I smelt that rat one day when your boss was talking to mine." "Yes," I went on, "your master is looking for a place for mine." "I'm mighty glad about having you near by," said Gringo. But he added shrewdly, "What does your missus say?" "She started it," I exclaimed. "It began this way. The other night she and master were talking before they went to bed. Said she, 'Rudolph, there is much sickness in New York among children.' 'Yes,' said he anxiously. 'Yes, I notice in the papers.' 'I'm worried about baby,' said she. 'So am I,' said he. 'Country life is better for babies,' said she, 'but I suppose you wouldn't like to go so far from your business.' Said he quietly, 'I've always loved the country better than the city, but I thought you couldn't abide it.' 'I used to dislike it,' she said, hanging her head, 'but we had no baby then, Rudolph.'" "And what did he say to that?" asked Gringo. "He didn't say anything. He got up and kissed her. They understand each other pretty well, now, and the next day, which was yesterday, he spoke to your master, and asked him to look for a place near yours. So you'll probably have us for neighbors, old boy. Isn't that great?" And I gave him a playful nip in his big shoulder. Gringo was deeply pleased, but he's like his master, he doesn't say much. "We're both no longer quite young," I went on, "and we've just got to make up our minds to like what our owners do. I prophesy that two clever men like your master and mine can make even country life interesting." "Wait till they deliver the goods," said the old dog. Then he added, "They'll be missed in this little old city." "But they won't leave it finally," I said. "They're planning to come in and out." I knew what he referred to. Mr. Bonstone and my master had been placing more and more of their business in the hands of their employees, and together they went about the city doing good. They had found out that a lot of harm results in many cases from rich people putting all of their charitable work in the care of hirelings. "Man to man," master used to say, "I want to know those I'm privileged to help." So often he left his office early, and he visited such poor places, that usually I was not allowed to go with him. I heard him telling his wife about the terrible suffering he found. "We'll have a war," he used to say often, "unless there's more contact between class and class." "Don't despoil yourself of all you have, Rudolph," mistress would say anxiously. "There's baby to be provided for." "I don't want to leave him a fortune, Clossie," he said one day. "A good education is all I wish to do for him." "Just a little something to start on," she said, with mother anxiety. Then she went on, "I wish you wouldn't call me Clossie any more. Say Claudia." Master was so pleased that he went out and bought her a beautiful ring to commemorate the occasion of dropping her doll name. While master was doing a little missionary work among human beings, I did a little among dogs, and had an adventure in the bargain. Of all the animals in the world, I pity most the performing animals. It is unspeakably pathetic to me to see those poor four-legged creatures on a stage, trying to do things they were never meant to do. Why should a monkey ride a bicycle, or pretend he's a fireman, when he just hates it? I've seen human beings in a theater shrieking with laughter at the antics of poor animals on the stage, whose eyes were eloquent with fright. Once I had as owner a lady who used to take me to the theater. She always had a box, and concealed by the flowing laces of her gown, I would watch everything that took place on the stage. Some things I liked. I think men and women enjoy strutting around, pretending they're someone else. But the dogs who appear in vaudeville, it nearly used to break my heart to see them. Once I saw roosters, poor, thin, half-starved looking creatures, who flapped their wings, and crowed, and stretched themselves when they came on the stage, showing that they had been confined in little cages, instead of leading a free, open-air life, as roosters should. Well, on the day, or rather the evening, when I played missionary, I had tried in vain to get Gringo to take a stroll with me. No, he would not, and lay down on a seat arranged for him in a window, so he could watch the passers-by in the drive. Summer was coming, and it was too late for fires, so he could not lie on the hearthrug. Master had gone off with Mr. Bonstone, somewhere on the east side. By the way, I must not forget to say that Mr. Bonstone had given up his last naughty saloon. They were all good ones now. He had a great scene with his wife one evening when I was present. He still clung to the Bowery drinking place, and she had found out about it. She drew the most dreadful picture of Cyria growing up and becoming a drunkard. Mr. Bonstone didn't know whether to laugh or get cross with her, for, as Gringo says, my boss's heart isn't on the water wagon. He believes in drink in moderation. Well, Mrs. Bonstone cried, and at last her husband comforted her, and said he would never sell another drop of liquor as long as he lived. "Nor drink it," she sobbed. "Well," he said, "I never have touched it. Don't think it wrong, but hated the taste." He had to promise, of course. A nice woman can do anything with a man, so now the Bonstones' house, like ours, was strictly teetotal, and if any persons fainted, they were revived pretty quick with some hot stuff that I think was mostly cayenne pepper. By the way, it made persons jump. To come back to the evening of my adventure. I slipped down Broadway, running close to the stores and keeping the people between me and the gutter. One seldom meets a policeman near shop windows. It was a lovely evening, with a warm spring-like feeling in the air, and this nice, wide, clean Broadway fascinated me more than ever, and everybody looked so happy and pleasant and well dressed that I concluded all the people with troubles had stayed at home. Nearly every person had on new spring shoes. I really think that nowhere in the world, except in Paris, does one see such pretty, well-shod feet as in New York. I danced along, meeting quite a number of dogs, some of whom I spoke to, some of whom I did not notice. The most of them were led, and of course all had muzzles on. I had passed several moving picture places and a few vaudeville houses when it suddenly dawned on me that I was getting too far down Broadway and had better return home. I cut down a side street, but did not get far, for just as I had gone a few steps, I smelt a smell that took me back to Boston and several years ago. I was living then on Beacon Hill, and in the house next to me was a fine little toy spaniel called Amarilla. She was a little darling, and had a way of tossing her long ears as if they were curls. One day she disappeared most mysteriously. No one could find out what had become of the lost Amarilla, though it was suspected she had been stolen. Amarilla had a very gentle, clinging sort of an odor. She was an exquisitely clean little dog, but no matter how clean dogs or human beings may be, they cannot get rid of what Gringo calls their odoriferosity. He vows he can track his master if he touches a thing. Well, I was very much excited when I scented Amarilla. The poor old lady who owned her was quite childish, and she actually died of grief over the disappearance of her dog. It would be a great feather in my cap to track her. Yes, and get caught myself, my native caution whispered to me. I surveyed the scene. A vaudeville house on a quiet, narrow street, enormously high buildings each side. A fine place for a getaway, as Gringo calls a scamper from danger. Well, I would risk something for Amarilla. The show had been going on for a little time, for it was quite a bit after 8, and very often the door opened and persons came out, presumably those who had played their part for the last time and were going home. So if I ran in the door and was cautious, I would stand a good chance of getting out again. I seized my opportunity and bolted in when an enormously fat lady in a light evening cloak came out and entered a taxicab that had been standing by the curbstone. Now I was inside the door, and what did I see? A bare, narrow hallway and some steps. I crept cautiously up the steps, nosing and smelling various odors, animals, sawdust, straw, stale food, and waves of heat from some badly ventilated hall. Ah, here my suggestion of Amarilla stopped. It was a medium-sized, untidy kind of basement room, with boxes littered about, traveling boxes of animals. All were empty. The animals must be on the stage with their trainer. But if Amarilla was on the stage, why was the room so strongly reminiscent of her? Amarilla was not on the stage. I followed my nose to a corner, and there was the dear little thing, crouching low, her pretty open face, like a child's, all distorted by fear. "Amarilla," I said softly. Oh, what a jump she gave. "Beauty," she said. "Why, Beauty, is that you?" Beauty had been my name in Boston, given me by a too fond mistress, who really thought me beautiful. "Tell me quick," I said. "What's the matter with you?" "I didn't do my tricks right," she said, "and the trainer beat me, and I was too frightened to go on the stage." "Then you're not happy with him." "Happy, Beauty, if you knew." And she began to moan and cry softly. There was blood on her pretty coat, and I said sharply, "Brace up now, and get out of this. Follow me. I'll lead you to a good home." "I'm afraid," she said, shrinking back. "I never had much spirit, and all I had has been whipped out of me. I don't believe I could run a block." "Oh, Amarilla," I said earnestly, "do come with me. If you don't, I shall go home and dream of your misery and cry in my sleep." That touched her a little, for she always was an unselfish little doggie. "Do come," I begged. For a few minutes she held out, and I was in an agony. Any minute her master might come and find me there, and I should be trapped too. "Oh, Beauty," she said despairingly, "I'd love to go, but he would run after me, and then he would nearly kill me." "Well, I'll lie down and let him catch me too." "No, no," she said wildly, "you wouldn't last any time, a dog of your spirit." My threat decided her, and she consented to follow me to the door. Waiting there in wild anxiety, I thought it would never open. We had to hide in a corner, and the trainer was actually marshalling the other dogs down from the stage to their traveling boxes before a stagehand came along and, opening the door, stepped out in the street to get a breath of air. I thought he would never move away from the open door. Finally, a German band struck up on Broadway, and he moved a few steps toward the corner. I gave Amarilla a push, and didn't we fly out! Most unfortunately, as we scuttled along toward Riverside Drive, he turned and saw us. He stepped back quickly into the doorway, and I knew he had gone to give the alarm. "Run, Amarilla, run!" I whispered. "They're after us, and if they catch us, your trainer will tear me limb from limb." Poor little soul! She was too wise to use her breath for speaking. She just tore on behind me, and nearly panted her little life out. I knew by her breathing that she hadn't been used to having much exercise. I had told her to run behind me, and not to think of automobiles or anything, but just to keep close to my hind paws. Of course, I led her right back to Broadway. It would have been foolish to keep on toward the drive, when the man had seen us going in that direction, and would likely get a taxi and follow us. I chose the front of another moving picture place, and made her creep in behind the billboards. "This is horrible," she gasped, "right in the jaws of danger." "Yes," I said, "just where they'll never think of looking for you." And didn't we, later on, have the satisfaction of hearing one man say to another, "Hear about Fifeson's dogs down at the other house? They've lost one. Saw her running off with another dog, a white fox-terrier, and can't find her." "How much was she worth to Fifeson?" asked the man addressed. "He reckons her at $500, but I guess he's romancing." Amarilla trembled frightfully, but I reassured her by licking her wounded head, and after a long time, when the crowd was coming out of the theater, I guided her among ladies' dresses, and creeping out, we rushed down to the drive again. Taking advantage of every bit of shadow we could find, we made short runs for home. It was about 11 when we arrived in front of our apartment house, and Amarilla was nearly dead. "Bear up a little longer," I said to her. "Imagine you're one of your big ancestors taught to keep within a short distance of a gun. And listen to a word of advice. The lady of the house is your friend. Pay no attention to the man." "I'm glad," she said faintly. "I'm terrified of all men, since that one has beaten me so much with his cruel whip." Oh, how angry I felt! That terrible whip is in evidence even on the stage, for did any one ever see a show of trained animals without the presence of the scourge in the hands of the master? He doesn't dare use it in public, but he shakes it, and the poor dog knows what is coming afterward. Oh, what a long breath I drew when we passed the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of our hallway, safe at last, and a sorry-looking sight. Amarilla's curls were muddy and torn, for I had had her in vacant lots, among shrubbery, everywhere, to escape the sharp eyes of the policeman. Then her own troubles made her look terribly. "What a wreck!" she murmured. Then she shut her eyes in pain and fatigue as she dropped to the floor of the elevator. "So you've got a friend," said the elevator boy with a grin. "You're a great dog. Never saw your beat." When I barked once at the door of our apartment, which was my signal for getting in, I hoped fervently that my master was at home. Thank fortune he was. I ran up to him, threw myself across his feet, and panted, for even I, strong as I was, felt rather worn out, but not so much with exertion as with the excitement of rescuing my former little friend. Amarilla, according to instructions, crept timidly to Mrs. Granton's feet. I never saw anything look more humble than that little dog. She doubled up her little legs so that she seemed to be crawling on her stomach. Her air was humility, sad appeal, and restrained suffering. It was inimitable. End of chapter 15.